Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive.
Always happy to be back.
And sometimes, the cases that stick with you, they aren't the ones with the most, crazy plot twists, but the ones that just leave you with tons of questions. Right?
Yeah.
So many unanswered questions, and this is definitely one of those.
Oh, that's sure.
Today, we're looking at the disappearance of Desiree Ferris. She was 18 years old, and she just vanished, seemingly into thin air. And it's a case that's baffled, investigators, the community, everybody for years.
It is. It really highlights how you can go from just ordinary everyday life into this desperate search for answers. Just like that.
And that's exactly what we're talking about. So
Okay.
picture this, okay? It's May 1st, 2017 in Liberty, Missouri.
Okay.
And we have Desiree, a young woman. Her nickname was Sunshine, which is so fitting because everybody says she had the brightest personality. And she's getting ready to celebrate her mom, Patty's birthday. She loves her cat. She dreams of becoming a model. And everything just seems normal, typical teenage life. But then everything changes.
And pretty quickly. I mean, what starts out as, just a teenager not coming home on time
Right.
turns into something way more complicated.
So Desiree's older sister, she gets home, but Desiree's not there.
Mm.
And what's really concerning for her family is the silence. There's no calls, no texts, nothing on social media. And think about it. For an 18-year-old today, everybody's glued to their phones.
Yeah.
So that's a huge red flag.
Huge.
Yeah.
I mean, it's that digital silence that really pushes this case from just a regular missing persons case into something way more serious. Because you have to think, for someone to go completely dark online these days, something's stopping that from happening.
So investigators start looking into it, right? And pretty quickly they figure out that Desiree was last seen with these two guys, Mark Arzola and Robert Jason Keegan.
Right.
And let's just say, these guys, they don't exactly have the cleanest pasts. They both have criminal records.
Yeah, which obviously puts them right under the microscope.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
Now, it's super important to remember, okay, having a record doesn't mean you're guilty of a new crime.
Of course, of course.
But it definitely adds, another layer of complexity to the investigation, especially when you consider where Desiree was last seen.
Right. And that was a trap house.
Exactly. A trap house.
Okay, so for people who might not know that term, can you break it down for us? Like, what is a trap house?
So basically, a trap house is a place where you have illegal stuff going on. Usually drug dealing is the main thing.
Okay.
And they're dangerous. They could be really unpredictable. And so, for a young woman like Desiree to be there, that's definitely a big concern. It's not somewhere you go unless you're involved in that world, and everything about Desiree suggests she was not.
So police are trying to piece together what happened, back at that trap house.
Right.
And they use a tool that's pretty much essential in any investigation today, which is cell phone records.
Yeah.
And those records, they actually paint a picture of her last known movements. But the trail just stops, which leads to even more questions.
And then you add on top of that the fact that Arzola and Keegan, they're telling different stories.
Yeah, they're not on the same page at all.
Arzola is saying that Desiree left the house in a white truck, and he thinks she was with Keegan. But Keegan's story, it's not nearly as clear. It's almost like a game of he said, she said.
Right.
Except the stakes are incredibly high.
Right, because a young woman is missing.
Exactly.
It's just so strange. And this whole time, her family, they're in agony. They're waiting for any little piece of news.
Of course.
But they're not just sitting around. They decide to do something. They create what they call Desi's Army.
I mean, this is where you really see what a community can do, when they band together. Desiree's family, led by her stepmom, Patty, they get this amazing group of volunteers. And they're all determined to find her. They're out there, putting up flyers. They're searching abandoned buildings. They're even using drones to try to find her, to scan the areas where she was last seen. It's amazing.
It really is inspiring to see so many people come together to help. But there is this other side to it, right? And that's the media attention, which can be a double-edged sword.
That's true. I mean, you're right. On the one hand, the media, it can be a huge help.
Yeah.
It raises awareness.
Right.
It gets the word out there, and sometimes that leads to tips. But it can also attract people who just want to take advantage of the situation.
Yeah.
And sadly, that's exactly what happened to Patty.
Yeah, it's awful. In addition to the genuine help she was getting, she also had to deal with scam artists and people giving her fake leads. People were really preying on her desperation. I mean, imagine going through all that while you're already looking for your missing child. It's heartbreaking.
And sadly, that's something that a lot of families of missing persons, that's something they have to deal with.
Yeah.
And it just shows, how complicated it can be when you have the media involved in these situations.
Right. But even with those challenges, Patty and Desi's army, they just kept going. They didn't give up on finding Desiree. And they have this symbol, too, a pink and purple porch light.
Oh, wow.
Those were Desiree's favorite colors. And that light is on every single night. It's like a beacon in the dark. It's a silent plea for her safe return.
It's a powerful image. It really shows how, even when you're facing so much uncertainty, hope can still be there.
Okay, so let's recap. We have this missing teenager. She was last seen in a dangerous place with two men who have different stories and criminal histories. Then you have this family desperately searching for her. They're clinging to hope. They're dealing with all this media attention. There's a lot here. And we've only scratched the surface. Before we go any further, I want to ask you, what really jumps out at you? What's caught your attention so far? Keep that in mind because we'll be digging deeper into this mystery in just a bit.
It really is a case that just pulls you in. And yeah, we've definitely laid out a lot of pieces, but the puzzle's not even close to being solved.
And I think one of the biggest questions everybody has is, what about Keegan? He seems like he could be the main suspect, right? His phone activity is weird. He's not talking to the police at all, and he's already in trouble with the law. So what would it take for investigators to actually charge him, in connection with Desiree going missing?
That's where it gets really tough. It's easy to say, oh, he did it, and speculate. But for the law, suspicion isn't enough. They need hard evidence that shows he was involved in her disappearance, or that something happened to her.
So what kind of evidence are we talking about here? Because, Desiree's still missing, so there's not a crime scene to investigate.
That's exactly it. This is what they call a nobody case, and they're super hard to solve.
Okay.
Because without a body, it's really hard to even know if a crime happened, let alone who did it.
So how do they even start to build a case without that key piece of evidence?
They got to use what they have. And a lot of times that means putting together this puzzle with tons of missing pieces. They have to rely on what's called circumstantial evidence.
Mm-hmm.
So things like cell phone records, witness statements, things like that. For instance, if they could find Desiree's DNA in Keegan's car or his house, that would be huge. Or if they found something on his phone showing he was at a specific place at a specific time, that could be really bad for him.
Okay, so circumstantial evidence can be important, but I'm guessing it's not always a slam dunk, right? Like it doesn't automatically mean someone's guilty?
You got it. Circumstantial evidence, it can be powerful, but it needs to be really strong and convincing to prove without a doubt that someone's guilty. And that's where the fact that Arzola and Keegan are telling different stories, that really hurts the investigation.
Because it just makes everything confusing. It creates doubt.
Exactly. Because of their inconsistencies, it's hard to figure out what really happened to Desiree. It's like trying to read a map that someone scribbled all over. You might have a general idea, but the details are messed up.
And then you have Keegan refusing to talk to the police. I know he has the right to remain silent, but it just feels like he's hiding something important.
Yeah, that silence, it's definitely frustrating for investigators. And it could mean a few things. Maybe he's scared, or he's trying to protect someone. Or maybe he's hoping if he keeps quiet, the case will just go away.
So where does that leave the investigation now? Is this just going to become another unsolved mystery?
It's possible. Cold cases are really hard to solve, but it's not impossible. New technology comes out all the time, and sometimes all it takes is one new piece of information, one new clue, and suddenly the investigation is back on track.
So you're saying there's still hope even after all this time?
Definitely. And that's why what Desi's army is doing is so important. They're keeping Desiree's case in the public eye. They haven't given up on finding answers, and that makes a difference. They haven't given up hope, and neither should we.
And it's not just about finding Desiree. It's also about getting justice for her, right? Holding whoever's responsible accountable. But I'm curious, in a nobody case like this, how do investigators even know what charges to file? Because if they don't know for sure what happened to her, how do they know what crime to investigate?
That's a great question, and it shows just how complicated these cases are. Investigators, they have to make their best guess based on the evidence they have. So they might start by thinking it's a kidnapping and then change their focus as they learn more. Or maybe they think something bad happened. But without a body, it's really tough to know if it was murder, manslaughter, or something else entirely.
So they kind of have to work backward, following the evidence and seeing where it leads.
Yeah, it's like trying to put together a broken vase, but you have no idea what the picture on it was supposed to look like. You have these little bits of information, and they have to try to make them fit together in a way that makes sense.
And all this time, the family's just waiting, wondering, hoping. It must be so hard for them not knowing. But as we've seen, Desiree's family isn't just sitting around. They're out there fighting for answers, fighting for justice, and most importantly, fighting for her to come home. That pink and purple porch light, it represents their hope that she'll come back.
It really does show the power of love and how strong people can be. Even when they're dealing with such a terrible loss, they still have hope.
And it's that hope that keeps everyone going, keeps everyone searching for answers, and keeps them believing that even in the darkest mysteries, the truth can come out. But before we get to the last part of our deep dive, we want to hear from you guys. What are your thoughts so far? What questions do you have? Hold on to those thoughts because we'll be talking about them more in a little bit. It's crazy how much these cases can make you think. You get so caught up in trying to figure out what happened.
I know, right? And like you said, we've been talking about Desiree's story, and there's still so much we just don't know. It's like we're lost in the woods, we can see the trees, but we have no idea which way to go.
Yeah, and it makes you realize how tough it is to be an investigator. They're not just dealing with clues and facts. They also have to deal with the family's pain and the pressure to find answers.
Oh, absolutely. It's a balancing act. You got to follow the rules, analyze the evidence, but also be there for the people involved.
Okay, so let's pretend we're detectives working on Desiree's case. Where do we go from here? What's the next step?
Well, I'd go back to the beginning. I'd look at those interviews with Arzola and Keegan again and really carefully go over every word and see if there's anything we missed, any little detail that didn't make sense before. And of course, the phone records, those are so important. We need to analyze those really closely, figure out where they were and when 80s. Maybe we'll see a pattern or something that doesn't add up, which could give us a new lead.
And what about all those tips that Patty got? Some of them are probably nothing, but maybe there's a good one in there somewhere, right?
It's possible. You can't ignore anything. Every tip, even the ones that seem like junk, got to be investigated. Takes a lot of time. But sometimes those tiny little details end up being the key to solving the whole thing.
Like trying to find a needle in a haystack. But sometimes that one needle is what you need to connect everything together.
Exactly. And that's where everyone else comes in. You know, someone out there might have seen something or might know something that could help.
Right. And that's why we always say, if you know anything about this case, even if you think it's not important, please say something. You could be the missing piece of the puzzle that brings Desiree home.
Exactly. Even if you don't think it's a big deal, it could be the one thing investigators need to figure things out.
We'll put Desiree's missing person poster on our website and the number for the Greater Kansas City Crime Stoppers tip line. So if you have any information at all, you can call them. You don't even have to give your name if you don't want to.
Right. You can stay anonymous if that makes you feel more comfortable.
Desiree's case, it reminds us that these stories aren't just headlines or something you see on the news. They're about real people and real families whose lives are turned upside down because someone they love is missing.
And the fact that Desiree's family and the community are still looking for her after all this time, it shows how powerful hope can be. They haven't given up, and we shouldn't either.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Desiree's disappearance, we want to leave you with this thought. What would you do if someone you loved just vanished? Could you stay hopeful when everything seems so uncertain? Would you keep searching even when it feels like there's nowhere else to look? These are tough questions, but they're important because sometimes the answers we find within ourselves are the ones that matter most. And who knows, maybe by asking ourselves these questions, we can help bring Desiree home. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.